In the summer of 1995, a hiker went missing in the Oregon mountains, which disturbed the peaceful area. People in the local community started talking and wondering what happened. They began to believe that the hiker had died from a rare virus called Hill's fever, spread by animals. However, the indigenous people of the area called the mysterious virus the face of the wolf because of their deep wisdom. During this tense time, a man named Grady and his son Blake went into the forest for a hunting trip, and Blake was fascinated by the colorful mushrooms and singing birds, which annoyed Grady. So Grady reminded Blake to stay alert because the forest could be dangerous. Suddenly, Blake saw something move, and Grady confirmed it was a deer. But when Grady got ready to shoot, the deer ran away into the thick forest. When Grady turned back, he was terrified to see that Blake was missing. While Blake found a great spot to wait for deer, but instead of seeing a deer, he saw a mysterious shadow that quickly disappeared. Curious, he decided to find out what it was, but then he heard growling, which scared him. So he backed away in fear until his father, Grady, emerged from the bushes and scolding him for wandering off. As the forest noises grew louder, Grady sensed danger. He and Blake quickly ran to a hunting blind, a small shelter for hunters, to hide. Grady grabbed his gun, and they both held their breath as they heard a creature climbing the ladder to the shelter. The creature tried to break in but couldn't, so it started circling the shelter, looking for another way to get inside. In the quiet moment, a random animal got too close, catching the creature's attention. It jumped down to attack, and Grady took the chance to look out. What he saw was upsetting. A deer, torn apart, lay dead on the ground. Grady also saw a creature and aimed his gun, but it ran away very fast, making eerie howls that echoed through the trees. Blake, scared, asked what it was. Grady, hiding his fear, told his son it was just a bear, though he felt uneasy inside. That night, Grady called his friend Dan quietly, saying he had seen the wolf. But Dean doesn't believe her, so he tells her, "Don't you want to keep your child safe? You have to help me." Unbeknownst to them, young Blake overheard the conversation and ran away in fear. 30 years later, Blake is now grown up, married to Charlotte, and has a lively daughter named Ginger. One evening, Blake got a letter and some keys. The letter said that the state of Oregon had declared his father dead after being missing for years. Even though Blake had expected this, it still hit him hard. As he realized what had happened, he felt a lot of regret. He wished he had fixed their relationship and hadn't left home so soon. He was sad because he realized that he could never get back the time he had lost with his father. The next day, Blake visited Charlotte at outside her office and told her that he felt they were growing apart. Receiving that letter made him realize he needed to spend more time with his loved ones. Since Grady's belongings were in Oregon, Blake suggested they take a long family trip there. Charlotte got excited, and soon they were on their way to Oregon. During the trip, they reached a fork in the road. Blake tried to check the map on his phone, but there was no signal. Just then, Ginger saw someone in the hunting blind and quickly told her parents. A man with a gun came closer, and they were surprised to see that it was Derek, Dan's son and Blake's old friend from childhood. And Derek explained that fewer people lived in the area now and the usual way to Grady's old farm was no longer usable. Knowing they needed help, Derek offered to guide them and got into the truck. As the sun was setting, their peaceful drive was suddenly disrupted when a mysterious wolf-like creature appeared in the road. Blake quickly tried to avoid it, causing the truck to swerve into a ditch and crash against a tree. Luckily, Blake woke up and made sure his family was okay. They were all fine. Derek, eager to get out, opened the door and fell onto the ground. Seeing this, Blake told his family to carefully climb out through the window, but they heard growling nearby. Soon, Blake saw the wolf approaching quickly in the truck's rearview mirror. Blake quickly shut the door, seeing Derek hurt on the ground. The wolf breaks the truck window with its claw and also injures Blake's arm. Then the wolf attacked Derek, quickly killed him and dragged his body into the woods. Seeing this, Blake told his family to jump off the truck, and they started running through the dark forest, hoping to reach Grady's house for safety. As they got closer to Grady's house, the wolf came nearer, so the family ran with all their strength toward safety. They reached the house and stumbled inside, slamming the door shut. Blake pushed against the door, feeling the wolf trying to break in. After a scary few minutes of the creature pounding on the door, it finally left. Afterward, Blake took a flashlight and went to the basement to start the generator. Once it was on, the power came back, lighting up the house and the nearby farm buildings. Later, Ginger, sounding scared, said she wanted to go home. So Blake gently explained that it was too dangerous to travel at night, and they would have to stay until morning. But Charlotte, still shaken by what had happened, asked Blake what they had seen on the road. Blake described a strange animal that stood on two legs like a person. After saying this, Blake pushed a heavy cupboard against the door to block it. Then, he tried using his father's old radio to call for help, but only heard static. Just then, Blake smelled something strange and went into another room, where he found a lot of meat. He tried a piece, but felt a sharp pain in his jaw. He thought it was because of the crash. Suddenly, one of his teeth fell out, which scared Charlotte. She made him sit down to check his injuries. She found a deep cut on his arm and started cleaning it. Blake thought it was from the broken window, but Charlotte noticed it didn't look like a normal glass cut. Worried, she bandaged his arm and went back to the radio, trying to get help. After a while, Blake started working on nailing wood to the floor in front of the cupboard to make the door stronger. But his shaking hands made it hard to hold the hammer, and he hit his fingers painfully several times. Sweating, he took a break to get water from the kitchen. Then, he heard some thumping sounds in the distance. Feeling cautious, Blake grabbed the hammer and went upstairs to follow the noise, his heart beating fast as he got closer to the room where the sounds were coming from. Blake carefully entered the room, following the noise to the wardrobe. He opened it slowly and found a spider making the sound. Suddenly, he felt dizzy and had trouble breathing, his vision blurring for a few intense seconds. When the dizziness went away, Blake quickly went downstairs to check on his family. He found Charlotte and Ginger safe on the couch, but the relief didn't last long. Soon he heard footsteps and growls getting closer. Blake's movements became strange as he slowly went to the window, sniffing the air like an animal. Charlotte watched, confused and worried about her husband's odd behavior. As Blake moved toward the door, the wolf grabs his leg through the pet door, trying to pull him outside. Blake screamed in pain, so Charlotte quickly acted, hitting the wolf's arm with a hammer to make it let go. Blake's screams stopped as he passed out, and darkness took over. When he woke up on the couch, confused and in pain, he called out for his family but heard a strange, distorted noise. He followed the sound to the basement where he found Ginger sleeping and Charlotte, still trying to get help on the radio. When no one answered, she slammed the microphone down. Just then, Charlotte heard Blake wheezing and saw him standing in the dark. When he tried to speak, he only said things she couldn't understand. Worried, Charlotte told him she didn't know how to help him. As Blake's condition got worse, he wet his pants, so Charlotte gently took him upstairs. As Blake lay down, he noticed his hair were falling off. Charlotte, trying to understand what was happening, gave him a pen and paper, hoping he could write his thoughts. And Blake struggled to write, but eventually, he managed to scribble the word, dying. Charlotte's heart broke, but she stayed calm and reassured him that he was just sick and would get better. As Charlotte kept telling Blake she loved him, his empty stare showed the sad truth. He couldn't hear her anymore, and his vision had become blurry with a strange blue color. When Blake tried to talk to his daughter, he was horrified to see blood on his shaking arm. After telling Ginger to wait in another room, Charlotte carefully rolled up Blake's sleeves and uncovered his bandage, showing how bad his arm looked. Blake reacted quickly. He ran away and started scratching his arm. Things got worse when Blake started biting his own wound, with his teeth falling out with each bite. This terrifying scene made Charlotte freeze in fear. After a moment of stillness, Blake stopped and looked at Charlotte for a few seconds before turning away. Feeling helpless and unable to talk to him, Charlotte followed but eventually decided to leave him alone. Afterward, Charlotte looked out the window and saw Grady's old car, which gave her hope in their desperate situation. She rushed to the basement to find the keys and a spare battery, then grabbed a knife from the kitchen for protection. Then she guided her family to the car, helping the weak Blake into the back seat because he could hardly move. As she helped Ginger, a chilling howl made them more scared. Charlotte quickly connected the battery to the car's engine. With her heart racing, Charlotte got into the driver's seat and tried to start the car. At first, the car wouldn't start, but after several tries, the engine finally started. Charlotte quickly unplugged the battery and got back in the driver's seat, feeling a little hopeful. Just as they were about to leave, the wolf jumped onto the car, broke the windshield, and tried to grab Charlotte. In a panic, Charlotte used the knife to fight the creature. Her brave actions distracted the wolf long enough for the family to get out of the car and run away. With the wolf chasing them, the family quickly climbed to the top of the greenhouse. Blake pulled the ladder away so the wolf couldn't follow, but the wolf went into the greenhouse tent to weights. Soon the greenhouse tent can't hold the weight of them, and the pins holding it began to loosen. The wolf kept jumping and clawing at the greenhouse roof, making holes. Scared, Ginger tried to get closer to her mother but slipped through one of the holes. Her parents grabbed her just in time before the wolf could reach her. Blake realized the danger and growled, pointing to the house to signal his family to go there. He bravely jumped off the greenhouse and ran into the forest, making the wolf chase him. Charlotte and Ginger used this chance to run back to the house. Ginger yelled at her mom for leaving Blake behind. Charlotte, with a shaky voice, explained that Blake was trying to protect them by leading the wolf away. At that moment, they heard growling outside, and Charlotte carefully looked out the window to see if it was Blake. She quickly opened the door and helped him inside. He collapsed onto the living room floor, his body twisting more because of his transformation. Ginger, with her heart pounding, went up to him. Even though she was scared by his wild snarling, she gathered her courage and gently touched his forehead. She tells Blake she loves him, but he can no longer understand her words. His vision is now even more distorted with a deep blue color. Just then, he bends over and vomits a lot of blood, while his nails painfully fall off his fingers. Ginger screams in horror, and Charlotte quickly pulls her away from the terrible scene. Then, with a fierce growl, Blake jumped over the table, growling at Charlotte. Her steady gaze brought him back to his senses for a moment. Regaining some control, Blake turned to leave the house, but as soon as the door opened, the wolf attacked, knocking him to the ground. The wolf kept hitting Blake. Charlotte ran in with bravery and stabbed the wolf in the back. The wolf howled in pain and turned its anger towards her and Ginger, so Charlotte quickly hied Ginger to another room to keep her safe. While Blake stopped the wolf and continued fighting it, they bit and punched each other, and Blake was too tired. Eventually, he couldn't keep going and passed out. As the wolf dragged Blake's limp body into the hallway, Charlotte grabbed a fire poker in desperation and hit the wolf on the back to drive it away from Ginger's hiding spot. At that moment, Blake used his last bit of strength to jump at the wolf, tackling it to the ground. He pinned the wolf down and bit its neck hard enough to kill it. Once it was over, Blake looked closely at the creature and saw a familiar tattoo. He suddenly realized that this was his father, Grady, who had disappeared years ago and turned into a werewolf. Feeling overwhelmed, Blake ran outside, stumbling as his transformation reached its peak. His nails turned into claws, his body grew more hair, and his teeth became fangs. His vision became clearer, now fully transformed into a werewolf. Blake let out a loud howl that echoed through the night. Inside the house, Charlotte was comforting Ginger when the power suddenly went out. Anxious, she looked out the window and was shocked to see her husband as a werewolf. Grabbing a knife for protection, Charlotte followed the scary noises and found Blake behind Ginger. When he tried to approach, Charlotte slashed his arm to protect their daughter. Then Charlotte and Ginger quickly fled to the barn for safety. Moments later, Blake appeared at the barn door, tearing through the wood to get inside. Once inside, with his enhanced vision, he moved through the darkness easily, getting closer to his family. As Blake took another step, he accidentally stepped into a bear trap and got stuck. Seeing this, Charlotte and Ginger ran away. Blake tried to follow them, but the trap held him tightly. In desperation, he cut off his own foot to get free. Fueled by anger, Blake continued to chase his family into the forest. There they found Derek's severed arm, and Charlotte quickly grabbed Derek's gun. Then they ran again and hid in the hunting blind. In a short while, Blake also arrived there and climbed the stairs, looking at his family with sad eyes. Ginger, feeling sad, understood that her father wanted to end his suffering. As he tried to get into the blind, Charlotte, startled, fired the gun. Then Charlotte and Ginger left the blind, crying and holding each other. As they watched Blake die, in the morning, they stood together, looking at the beautiful valley that Blake had loved since childhood.